Okay, let's just cut right to the chase here. The United States is a massive global economic outlier. Now sure, parts of Western Europe and Asia offer incredibly high standards of living, but if you actually look at the sheer scale of individual and national wealth, the US has quietly just pulled so far ahead of the rest of the world over the last few decades. We aren't just talking about a slight edge here. We're looking at an economic machine that is literally operating on an entirely different level.
Let's kick this off with a truly mind-blowing statistic: 42.7%. That is the America's share of all the millionaires in the world. And just to be totally clear, this massive slice of the pie is overwhelmingly driven by the United States alone.
The entire rest of the planet combined? They make up the remaining 57.3%. Think about that for a second. The US has managed to consolidate nearly half of the globe's millionaire-tier wealth, despite representing only a tiny fraction of the global population. It's a completely staggering disproportion. And it really forces the obvious question, right? How exactly did this happen?
Well, to understand the overarching why behind this absolute dominance, today we're going to decode the 5 core engines powering this machine: the American wealth anomaly, tech monopolies and risk culture, the dollar and energy advantage, the global talent magnet, and finally, the price of primacy.
Starting right off with Section 1, the American wealth anomaly. The most crucial thing to grasp right out of the gate is that this massive wealth concentration, it isn't an accident. It's not just some random fluke of the global markets. It is the direct result of very deliberate structural, cultural, and financial engines all working perfectly in tandem over decades. To really understand American economic primacy, we've got to look under the hood.
Which brings us to Section 2, tech monopolies and risk culture. Look back over the last 20 years. The global economy underwent a massive digital transition, and the US effectively captured the absolute crown jewel sector of the whole thing. Just think about the heavy hitters we all know: Microsoft, Apple, Nvidia, Alphabet, Amazon, Meta. Because these multi-trillion-dollar tech monopolies are headquartered right in the US, the immense wealth generated from their stocks and their executive compensation overwhelmingly stays right within US borders. It leaves Europe and other developed regions basically watching from the sidelines.
And that ties into a really stark cultural divergence in how average citizens actually go about building their net worth. Americans inherently compound their wealth through the stock market. Investing in equities through things like 401ks or IRAs is just a cultural default, letting them tap right into the most liquid capital markets in the world. Conversely, citizens in Europe typically park their wealth in low-yield savings accounts or real estate. So when the market goes on a huge multi-year bull run, American households experience this massive compounding wealth effect that others just completely miss out on.
Now, this aggressive approach to risk extends straight into entrepreneurship, too. The U.S. possesses this deeply ingrained venture capital culture where incredibly forgiving bankruptcy laws mean failure is often just viewed as a stepping stone. In Silicon Valley, a failed startup is basically a rite of passage for founders. It's almost a badge of honor. Meanwhile, in many other cultures, business failure carries a really heavy social and financial stigma. And that naturally stifles the kind of aggressive, boundary-pushing innovation that essentially built the modern digital economy.
Moving right along to Section 3, the dollar and energy advantage.
You might have heard the phrase exorbitant privilege. Because the US dollar acts as the world's primary reserve currency and massive global commodities, like oil, are priced in dollars, there is a constant built-in global demand for it. So what does this mean? It means the US government and American corporations can run massive deficits and borrow money at significantly lower interest rates. And they do this all without facing the crippling currency devaluations that would immediately wreck any other nation trying to pull off the exact same thing.
In this structural financial advantage, it's paired with a complete 180-degree reversal in energy dynamics. If you rewind just 20 years ago, the US was highly dependent on foreign oil. But today, we are looking at total, absolute energy independence, and that's driven largely by the massive domestic shale boom.
Today, the U.S. economy is essentially fueled by its own domestic resources. In fact, the United States has actually surpassed both Saudi Arabia and Russia to become the single largest producer of oil and natural gas in the entire world. This energy independence acts as a massive competitive moat in 2 huge ways. First off, drastically lower input costs. American factories, and crucially, those incredibly power-hungry tech data centers, pay significantly less for electricity than their European or Asian competitors. Second, it provides serious geopolitical insulation. When global conflicts spark huge energy crises, the U.S. economy just keeps humming along,
stable, profitable, and largely unaffected by the fallout.
Let's jump into Section 4, the global talent magnet.
So, the U.S. labor market is explicitly designed to do one thing: maximize output. First, it operates as a giant global brain drain, offering the highest compensation packages to systematically vacuum up elite international talent. Second, there's unmatched flexibility. Far fewer regulations around hiring and firing mean these companies can scale incredibly fast. And finally, the sheer human output is just much higher. Individuals in the U.S. work roughly 15 to 20% more hours per year than their European peers. So much for that month-long August vacation, right? It's just a relentlessly high output environment.
Finally, Section 5, the price of primacy.
Now, we absolutely have to include a major cost of living caveat here to keep things grounded. While the average wealth and the projected 2026 GDP per capita sit at an exceptionally high $94,430, we've got to recognize that this is just a macroeconomic average. In reality, the wealth generated by this massive economic machine is highly unequal. The daily financial reality for the average citizen tells a very, very different story.
The deliberate lack of a state-sponsored social safety net is exactly part of what keeps those corporate taxes lower and business flexibility so high. But it means Americans face severe out-of-pocket costs. Everyday structural services, things like healthcare, higher education, childcare, they are exponentially more expensive for the individual in the U.S. than for citizens living in countries with broader, more robust safety nets.
So as we wrap up this explainer, let's just take a step back and look at the full picture. We've seen the incredible engines at work here: the tech monopolies, the risk culture, the dollar's exorbitant privilege, energy dominance, and a totally relentless labor market. But it really leaves us with one unavoidable question to ponder. Does the staggering, unmatched wealth produced by this outlier machine actually justify the steep personal and structural price of its primacy? Something to think about. Thanks for exploring this with me today, and I'll catch you in the next explainer.